Hello and welcome to our Education for All video series, where we will be talking to a range of wonderful people about their experiences. Education for All is a campaign to help break down the accessible barriers within the education system and to ensure that everyone has a future that they deserve. You can find all of the information and the campaign pack at www.horlicks.com. Today, we're joined by Sheila MacNeill. Sheila is an independent learning consultant. Sheila, welcome.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Would you like to start by introducing yourself and telling everyone a background about kind of where you're from and what you do these days as an independent learning consultant?
Yeah, sure, of course. As you've said, I'm an independent digital learning consultant. So, I work mainly with the higher education sector, with universities in the UK and in Europe and beyond, and with international agencies. My work is mainly focused on digital learning and helping develop digital capabilities, primarily for staff, but obviously there's students involved in there as well. Um, and I work and I think because I focus quite a lot on helping people think about learning design, how they're planning programs and modules or courses. So I have quite a broad overview of what's happening in the sector. Before I did this, I've been doing this role for about 5 years now. Before I did that, I was a senior lecturer at Glasgow Caledonian University in the academic development department there. And before that, I worked as a research fellow at the University of Strathclyde, and I worked in a number of national and international e-learning projects, as they were called back in the day before we talked about digital. I also have quite a strong research interest in digital education and the whole notion of what a digital university is. So I've got quite a lot of publications to write about that area as well.
Wonderful, a fantastic range of experience there. One thing that I definitely picked on at the start was you've worked internationally as well as here in the UK.
Mm.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that and your different experiences with maybe the ways of teaching or learning in kind of countries outside of England?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, it's mainly, I suppose, global north that I have worked with. But I did do a bit of work during the pandemic with UNESCO, and we were looking at supporting their trainers who were supporting teams within developing countries around the world. I think generally, though, when you're thinking about learning and teaching, a lot of the issues are pretty similar wherever you are. There's obviously cultural differences, and I think some of the biggest differences in terms of digital education are the cultural approaches to education. So, in terms of cultural expectations of the lecturer being the font of all knowledge. So, there's quite a lot of countries that do feel like that. So, if you go to places like South Korea, maybe China, certain African countries as well, and many people who deal with international students, that's one of the biggest struggles that a lot of international students have when they come to the UK, is that completely different kind of educational expectations of the student. So here in the UK and in Ireland and in most European countries, we're trying to develop, I suppose, more kind of what they call social constructivist approaches, where we're co-creating with students. We're trying to develop students' agency. It's not just about, being didactic, that kind of at the front of the stage. It's more that kind of that guide on the side, as people would say. So there's those issues, but again, it all depends on context, and obviously depending on where you are in the world. In terms of digital learning and teaching, it's access to technology, access to devices, access to broadband, to mobile phone signals. So, for example, in Africa, lots of people have a mobile phone, but they might not have a computer at home. But again, you have to think about charging, access to electricity. When can you charge your phone? What size of resources should you be sending people? How much reading can you expect someone to do on a mobile phone? How much group work can you expect people to do on a phone? How much can you expect them to be uploading things into a system? So there's a whole myriad of things that you have to think about. And I think for any learning and teaching situation, whether you're doing it completely digital or whether you're doing a blend of more in person and doing some digital learning, context is always key in any learning situation.
Mhm. Do you find since the pandemic of everyone being pushed online for obvious reasons. Do you find that that there is more digital learning compared to blended or in-person learning?
I think it's a bit of a mix. I think during lockdown, obviously it was quite traumatic for lots of different reasons for people. I think that particularly in I can really only speak with any kind of knowledge from the HE sector, that actually in terms of infrastructure at universities in the UK, we were pretty well supported in that there were virtual learning environments in place. People had, you know, blended learning is not a new thing. Digital learning is not a new thing. People have been using different aspects of digital, what it's called e-learning or digital learning. Been doing that long before the pandemic as well. I think because there was obviously that rush, it was quite a panic, and not everyone was comfortable with doing that. And it does take a bit of time to think about how you're going to adapt your approach to learning and teaching to do it completely online, and that was a shock for people. There was also access issues for everyone. I think when we've gone back, I think there was an opportunity just kind of in between sort of the first and second lockdowns that people were quite excited, and they were actually, oh gosh, we've got a lot of flexibility. I'm thinking about what I'm doing in different ways. Then there was kind of a very much a government-led pushback, particularly in England actually, of getting students back on campus. But I think that was more kind of that general narrative, let's get back to normal, get people back in offices. You had to be on campus, you had to be doing exams in an exam hall with a bit of paper and pen. And I think that political message did kind of knock back some of the more progressive, strategic things that some universities were thinking of. I'm not saying that that's stopped. I mean, people are doing a lot of things, and it has changed. And I think the one thing that has done it has really focused the sector on potential and the need for staff and student digital capabilities, and the need to keep developing them.
No, definitely. It's again one thing that we've kind of seen throughout these conversations. It's teaching people and teaching the students digital wise and accessibility wise, but also teaching the teacher, or making sure that's woven through to their learnings as well on that one.
Yeah. And there's, I was just going to say, just to follow on from that, there's been lots of studies even, before the pandemic. One of the biggest influences for students in terms of successfully using any kind of technology is the scaffolding that they get from their lecturer or from their teacher. So it's really, really important that, there's staff development in place for our staff to make sure that they're confident, and also that we talk more about co-creation, particularly in higher education. So actually it takes quite a lot of confidence to actually be led by your students as well, but that can be really exciting in terms of looking at different creative ways to use technology within an educational context too.
We've spoken to a college based in Loughborough, and they're trying to bring on more technology being used, and they're saying the same, that their students are actually telling them more things to use and more apps to use to help them with the learning. So yeah, it's definitely a multi-dimensional way to learn from here. Why do you feel digital accessibility is crucial within the education sector?
Well, I don't think it's just education. I think it's in life in general, isn't it? We have to be accessible. We have to be thinking about different needs of all our learners and everyone in society. So I think it's a reflection of what's happening. But obviously with technology, there are various systems or apps or things that are primarily designed for, a typical person. And we forget that there are people that have different accessibility needs. So I think it's really important, if we want to have an equitable society, that everyone has the right to education, and that's enshrined in UNESCO, the right for education. So there's all sorts of things. There's also lots of legal requirements about making content accessible for people now as well. But I think it's just being part of humanity, part of education. We shouldn't be excluding people from education. And, obviously, whilst there's a huge potential for technology, I think sometimes the technology sector, not, in broad sense, sometimes can forget about the accessibility needs of of everyone. That said, though, there are amazing things in terms of accessibility that can happen now because of technology. So I think, as with everything, it's kind of trying to find that balance. But I think it's really just about being inclusive and making sure we have equitable education system for all.
Brilliant. No, definitely, fully agree. Uh, Throughout your time, have you seen any barriers that have prevented students or teachers from having an equal learning experience due to poor accessibility?
Um, I think there are lots of barriers, and it's difficult to sort of say, that this is because of X and Y. There are all sorts of things. So there are socioeconomic barriers in terms of what you can afford to get. There can be there can be actually in terms of a college or university, what systems that they're able to provide, whether they're as up to date as they can be. Again, that said, there is a lot of support for students that's there, and more. I think what is harder now is I think that as we are in society in general, we're getting better about talking about accessibility in its broadest sense. Um, there are more needs that are coming through, and I think sometimes it can be more challenging for people who've got various neurodivergent issues. And I think that's a societal thing. We need to catch up and just kind of be more mindful of that. I think some of the barriers as well can be almost self-imposed, that maybe as a student I didn't realise that there were support services available to me that I could ask for. Maybe as a member of staff I'm not aware of all the support that my students can get, and that's kind of one of those time issues. I don't think people do that deliberately. I think that's just one of those things that happen in life. And I think when you're coming, particularly when you're going into university for the first time, um, there's a lot of information you're given in a very short space of time. So you probably have been told about support, but you might not have taken it in. I know universities are getting better at working with students and giving them individual support plans and those sorts of things. But sometimes sometimes you don't realise that if you just ask, you will find out. So, but there are. I think during the pandemic there were some issues, and that wasn't just for people with accessibility, but I suppose it's a more broader accessibility issue in terms of, I think it really highlighted how many students didn't have their own laptop, for example, or didn't have an up-to-date laptop. So particularly during first lockdown, when everyone was at home, there would be maybe cases of families that maybe had one decent iPad or laptop, and that was being shared by the whole family. So people are working, people at school, people at university, people at college. That was really difficult. And I've heard many stories of students trying to finish dissertations on a mobile phone, which is just really, really difficult.
Yeah.
Mobile phones are great, but they're not writing tools. So I think that kind of highlighted the fact that a lot of students are used to being on campus, going into the library, and there's laptop banks where they can take them out for a couple of hours, or they can go into specialist labs or just general computing labs and do things. So I think that highlighted kind of a broader access issue as opposed to accessibility issue. And then again, there were issues around, just having data and enough data to do the things that you needed to do. If you have a pay-as-you-go mobile phone, if you're downloading a few, large PDFs, that can take up all your data if you're doing lots of things. So there were those kind of issues, and just getting equipment to students, and it might have flagged up that actually needed accessibility things. So there were challenges there as well. I'm sure there are lots of examples, but I do know that most universities, I would say every university, will do their utmost to support their students once they know there is an issue.
Oh, that's always good. When you're talking to maybe lecturers, academics, teachers, do you feel that they are aware of accessibility needs throughout?
Yeah, they are. And I think, as I said before, I think in general, I think societal awareness of accessibility needs is increasing all the time, which is fantastic. I think, there, like everything, there are some people who are more aware. And I know there are, different roles that people can take on. So someone might be in their department, they might have a responsibility for, accessibility. So they might know a little bit more. So I think it's like everything, depending on where you're coming from and what area you're working in, and
Mm.
what student cohort you have, you might be more familiar with some things than others. There might be some needs that you have never come across before, so you're on a journey with your student. So you might have to find out with the student what support is actually there. But a lot, again, going back to the whole sort of digital learning thing, there are amazing things you can do with technology now that can really help people. So some really relatively straightforward and simple things, particularly for students that maybe have dyslexia, just changing fonts and changing colours. And
Mhm.
those sorts of things can have a huge impact. But again, it's knowing that. And, just being aware. I mean, I remember being told years ago about how just, colours to avoid for people who were colourblind. And that's just a really easy thing to do. So I think, again, there's lots of things that technology can help us with to make things that bit easier for our students.
And I mean, when we were talking to my old head teacher, we were talking how computers were a brand new thing at the time of learning. Obviously, it's gone up exponentially. I can never say that one. Um, but have you seen, since kind of digital has become a key part of life, do you find that it's, I don't want to say easier, but there is better access to support, there's better access to online content, and it's made the learning process better for everyone?
Uh, yes and no. I think it has. Yeah, I think it's getting better. One of the areas that I work in is around supporting people designing online programs or blended programs. So I think there's more of an awareness, more of a focus on it and a user, which is really positive now. So I think it is getting better. Um, the reason that design is so crucial is that we have so much technology. There is almost so much that we can potentially do that can be a challenge within itself, knowing what technology to use, how to create a video, how to do your podcast. There are a million and one different ways that you can use, and there's a new app being introduced every day. So that's quite challenging. So it's almost like having the confidence to have your little kind of digital toolkit. But before you think about what tool you're going to use, you actually have to be thinking about the learning, and it is, what is it you want your learners to do? And that's always going to be more important than any digital thing. So it's actually going back to that. What is it you want your learners to do, and what is going to be the most effective way, and what's going to be the most accessible and equitable and inclusive way that we can do that for all our students. So it's kind of making time to think about that, I think, is more important than the technology, because you'll always find a technology to do what you want to do. Um,
That's a really interesting way of thinking about this. When you're working with people to create these learning plans, is that one of the things you're teaching them to do, or moving them forward, is trying to show the plan and then see how it can be consumed by users?
Yeah, I mean, that will depend. Again, it goes back to context. So most in HE, most people will know how it's going to be delivered, and that will 9 times out of 10 be through a VLE, the University Virtual Learning Environment. So you'll have kind of your baseline toolkit there if you want. Depending on who's involved, what discipline area you're from. Um, it depends. So it depends how many people are involved in the design. So the kind of learning design processes that I support is very much kind of based on teams. So you would try and be working with a couple of academics, maybe a whole program team or a course team. If you've got learning technology support, you want to bring them in. You might be very lucky and have an instructional designer. You might want to bring in colleagues from the library. You might actually want to hopefully could bring in students as well. So it's about having conversations and then thinking about, again, starting at always with what it is you want the student to do, and then discussing the different options for how you want to do that. Some things are really obvious. It's like, oh, well, we can do that really easily because we've got X, Y, and Z. And sometimes staff won't actually realise that they can do that relatively easily, because like everyone, you kind of get used to using technology in a certain way. I mean, I don't know half the functions of of the tools that I use. So it's kind of it's working with people, and to show them ways, and also if they have an idea, to work with them to see how you can incorporate that. Again, you have to be, in terms of the HE as well, and using technology, there is a duty of care. So, and with data protection now, we have to be very careful about where we're asking our students to go in terms of them signing into other systems. So it tends to be now that tools that you can use are very closely integrated, or they'd be institutionally supported, so there's no question of students' data being used by anybody else. But that's a sort of ongoing thing. But you've got to be careful, think about that. But there's more support within institutions to let you know about that. But we certainly wouldn't really be wanting, in terms of like a formal course, to say, right, go off, we're going to take you to this new thing. That doesn't happen that often. Just because of GDPR now. So you have to.
Yeah, those famous letters that we
Yeah.
had on there. Yeah, no, fully agree. With the use of Microsoft 365 has, I think, changed everyone, because it is everything in one little area.
Yeah.
We've seen, especially from the public sector, a lot of streaming being done. So videos being streamed, real-time captions ish,
Mm-hmm.
auto-generated. Is this something that's coming into the HE
Okay.
side a lot more as well now?
Yeah, in fact, it was there before.
Mm-hmm.
Lecture capture was quite a big thing before the pandemic. But I think what happened with the pandemic was it became much more, well, not acceptable. You had to do it, and in terms of accessibility, it was really good, because people didn't actually have to ask. Everything was recorded. It was there. So yes, there's a lot of more video conferencing, but again, there are some digital capabilities that had to be discussed and developed through that. There's some questions now. There's again, even before pandemic, there were lots of discussions about, well, if you record a lecture, will students turn up on campus? I don't have to go to the lecture, but there's actually that it doesn't actually mean that. What students tend to do is that they use the resource in a different way, so that the recording becomes a digital artifact that's used at different times and in different ways by students. So they might go to a lecture and be taking notes, but then the next day when they can access it, they might, download it and just listen to it again, and just to check things that they didn't quite get, check their understanding. They might use it a couple of weeks later, again going through it. They might have a thing that started, not in education, but watch parties became a really big thing during lockdown. So education watch parties, you can watch the lecture again with your mates, say, did you understand that bit? No, I still don't understand that bit. Oh yeah, I've got it now, and people can do it. So there's different, that it becomes an additional resource which students really value, in itself. So they're being used now. There is a thing though, I think we're having the discussion now about being on campus versus being online, and kind of that wider engagement piece. But recording and doing more of kind of this sort of thing, video conferencing, is much more commonplace now than it used to be. Though I think it's receding a little bit, kind of the synchronous sort of chats like this now. They're still there.
You've almost preempted my question there. It's interesting how it's gone on and how it's continued. I fully agree from a note point of view. Even from meetings, it's good to have something that helps take notes. I know I can't concentrate on writing while I'm listening to people talk. But at the same time, you may want to remember that one key bit of information that you may have forgotten about. And say having a party or something like that is definitely going to help. So is there still that common problem, or that people are still thinking about, that because it's online, people won't turn up to lectures, or is
Yeah.
that's still a common thread?
I think it's lessened now, but there are other factors at play now, in terms of it's been a bit slow to get people back on campus, but that's more to do with kind of wider issues around the cost of living crisis. So there was some interesting research out this week about that, and some research into asking students why they weren't going on campus. And it might be because, you know, more students, well, HE students are working. It's like over half students have to have a job, you know, and a lot of them are almost working full time.
Mm-hmm.
So they're making economic decisions about when am I going on to campus. Actually, if that lecture is being recorded, maybe I can catch up. So it's about knowing the value. It was really sad, actually. I found it really sad that I read, you know, people were saying actually the reason we don't go onto campus, even though we want to be there because it's warm, we've got great Wi-Fi, the library's there, is we've actually not got enough food to take it to make a sandwich or something to eat when I go on campus. And you know, students saying, well, you know, I can buy an energy drink for 30 pence and that'll keep me going all day, and that's just wrong.
Can't do that,
um,
no.
so that there's kind of wider things, but I think what I don't think I know what's happening in the sector just now is there are discussions, and this goes back to the design, about talking with our students and getting them to understand the value of being anywhere, whether it's online or in person, but why we need to speak to you live.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about belonging, it's about community, about being part of a learning community, about getting to know people. So those discussions are happening just now, but we're you know, that's something I think is a broader issue. Yeah, that we all just need to keep working with our students to support them as much as we can.
Hmm. How how much of an influence do students have when designing new courses and designing new methods?
They have quite a
Um,
big influence, actually. So, you know, every module or course or program, they all have end of year surveys. So there's feedback. There's feedback generally taken midway through a semester. So the student voice is increasingly important. There's the NSS, the National Student Survey, run by the Student Union. That's a really influential piece of research. And there's feedback that people, you know, that's coming from students. So yeah, the student voice is really important, and you know, the sector is really trying very hard to work with students to improve, you know, and make sure that they're giving students the best experience that they can. So yeah, the student voice is listened to a lot. Again, it is a challenge for students to get involved, you know, and be a class rep. Not everyone can do that. And there are, you know, it is challenging because students are quite busy when they're at university, so we can't always be surveying and asking them their opinion on things
yeah.
as well, because they've got to be doing their study. So there is that kind of survey fatigue thing that you've got to be aware of. But yeah, the student voice is important, and yeah, definitely. And there are consistent things that come up every year in all these surveys that people know about feedback, about contact time. You know, so there's things that, you know, that we know what students are concerned about.
Do they have a chance to talk about how the lessons delivered? And by that I mean online, other tools, other digital ways that
Yeah,
they may consume.
yeah. Again, you know, sort of the surveys that will go out will ask about, you know, how things are delivered, and the mix of things as more you know, blended learning is happening, or people are calling it hybrid and high flex. Yeah, people are actively looking for feedback, because as a sector we need to know what works for our students, and you know, the staff as well. So yeah, and obviously they're you know, they're depending on your discipline area, um, and how you work as a, you know, as an individual academic or as part of a course team. There may be opportunities where you can actually change things based on student feedback, because you could try something and it's not working, so you might be able to change it. It might be that you're not able to change it at that point because actually it's going to be too complicated and that will impact, you know, an assessment or whatever. But yeah, there's, you know, people are always do try and build in feedback, and make sure that what we're doing actually works for our students.
Oh, wonderful. Um, Big picture now, and you know, if you've, you know, you're leading all your influence on so many people and building these new programs. If you were to recommend one or two things to help make the future more inclusive within well, with obviously within everywhere, but maybe within education, what changes would you like to see to help make everything more inclusive?
Oh, that's a biggie. and
Yes,
get
it
my
is. Yeah.
magic wand. I think time is a big thing.
Mhm.
So, we can do, as we've said, we can do wonderful things with digital technology. That's great. But people, staff and students need time to think about what they're doing, to engage and understand um, how to make things accessible, how to make things inclusive, what that means to different people as well. Um, so I think it's kind of building that in. I think um, there's quite a lot of pressure on people's time just now, and sometimes it can seem like there's always something new. There's always something that universities strategically want to do, and have to be seen to be reacting to. But sometimes they're not very good at giving people time to think about what they need to do, and kind of engage with that bigger picture. Um, but there's never enough time. But I think there
No.
could be time, and I think there could be time. I think it's really important. And I guess for students as well, that's really important as well. I think another thing we could do, I think we could maybe make room in our curriculum, which is really challenging because they're packed as they are, to actually have more conversations and more, I suppose, places where students can take risks and do things with digital technology in a safe space that's not
Okay.
going to impact a final mark, and kind of build some of the softer skills that are maybe not discipline specific but are really important for employability. So build team working and group working skills, and whether that's face to face or increasingly people need to be able to use Teams or Zoom or whatever. So I think that would be good if we could spend a bit of time at the beginning of people's university careers just to go through that, and also to help students in terms of their understanding their own digital capabilities, because I think there is an assumption that especially when you're old like me, you presume that young people are all digitally literate and they can do everything. And they can do a lot, but I think sometimes we forget, particularly in higher education, when you're taking people into quite a specialised and different digital environment, it's a shock and it's a higher risk. So you can be on your phone, posting here, there, and everywhere, doing all sorts of things because it's for you and you're totally confident about what you're needing to do. But when you're doing something that actually might lead to an assessment, that's a mark that impacts on your degree, it's much higher risk. So you're not going to do things as casually. So I think we sometimes forget that. So again, we need to make sure that we're giving enough time for students to let them engage with the technologies that we're giving them as well.
That's wonderful. I mean, let's hope that magic wand happens and we can spread that joy on there. No, that's brilliant. Sheila, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. All the best for the future for you.
Okay, thanks very much for including me in this conversation.
All right, thank you.